Hey there, it's so nice to see you here. Since I got a lot of questions about where to find reference pictures and how you can use them in your art, but also make it look unique, I thought in this video I'll share some tips and tricks with you. To be completely safe, I would recommend looking for royalty-free pictures on the internet. This means you can use the photographs without violating any copyrights. Because if you would want to sell your art, you wouldn't be able to do that without having permission from the person you took the picture from. Even if you only want to showcase your art online, you would also need to give credit and ask permission first. Some of the websites I like to use are Pexels and Unsplash.com. On these websites, you can browse through so many different pictures. All you gotta do is type in whatever you're looking for, or you can also look through different curated collections. Sometimes you never know what sparks an idea on what you can paint. I found these two pictures of a poppy field and I really like them both, but I wanted to change them up a little bit. I wanted to use the mountains from this one picture and use the poppy field from the other one. So I just cut out these parts and connected them together in Photoshop. If you want, you can take this even further and create completely new collages with different reference pictures. I did this a while ago for one of my paintings and I created something entirely new. Before you start, also look at the whole image. How is the composition? What are the elements that make the whole image come together? In this case, I have a cloudy sky with mountains in the background, a green field, red and blue flowers. Now, oftentimes you can get lost in all the details. Instead, focus on just a few elements, otherwise it can look too cluttered or all over the place, plus it can take you a lot longer to paint. Now, depending on the picture you want to paint, you can either create a grid on the reference picture and on your paper. This way you can use them as guidelines and you can know exactly where everything goes following the grid. Or you can add just a few guiding points so you know roughly where some of the main elements go. And these were just a few examples. Now, as I said earlier, sometimes it can be easy to get lost in all the details and overwork the whole painting. And you absolutely don't have to copy the whole picture just like that. Instead, you can remove unnecessary details and only focus on a few main things to capture the idea so you can make the whole artwork unique. So what I did instead, I focused only on a few red flowers and the main green color of the grass for now. And to create all these elements, I used the wet and wet technique, which allows you to paint very loosely. So first, I distributed water to the paper while leaving out the upper part. This way, the paint doesn't run further than that. And once the paper has absorbed the water just a little bit, I added a few small dots by using my warm red colored paint. If you press down the brush very quickly, the paint only spreads out a little. The longer you hold it down, the more it spreads out. This way you can play around with different sizes for the flowers. Next, I mixed a bright green color using my cool blue and cool yellow, and then I applied it around the flowers. The paper was still wet, so the flowers and the grass lightly blend into each other. Another area where it's easy to get lost is in the details inside the grass field. Instead of painting every single piece of grass, you can just hint at it. So here, for example, I used the wet and wet technique to add darker areas inside the grass while leaving out a few areas to create depth. I simply mixed a darker version of the green and brushed over thin lines row by row using the tip of the brush. The paper was still wet, so the different lines blended slightly into the wet paint. To add some life to the grass, I also splattered some of the green color over the area while covering the sky. And I also did the same with just clean water. This way the water pushes away the paint and creates this fluffy effect. Don't be afraid to experiment when you paint with watercolors. The process of painting can be so much more fun and rewarding than the final outcome because you get to play with paint and water while watching watercolors do its magic. And this is so fascinating to me. And from here I kept building up the painting with darker values and black dots inside the poppies just to make them look more like poppy flowers. While the flower field is drying, let's move on to the sky. Here again, I'm going to use the wet and wet technique. And instead of painting the clouds, I paint around them. So everywhere you see the blue sky in your reference picture, you add blue paint and leave out white space as the clouds. This way you get these fluffy looking clouds. So you can either apply the wet paint on the wet paper so it naturally dries like that, or you can blend out the edges a little bit. The fun part about watercolors is that you can play around with so many different techniques and ways how you apply your paint. And depending on what technique you choose, you get different styles. And again, you don't have to copy the reference picture completely. You can just use the idea of the cloudy sky and then apply the paint the way you want it. Once everything was completely dry, I continued building up the painting. To avoid hard edges and to make everything melt into each other, I carefully applied water to the flower field. And then I applied warm yellow paint to a few areas the same way as I created the grass. I just felt like the field needed some additional warmth. So here again, instead of copying every single centimeter exactly as on my reference picture, I used elements like the warmth of the field and where it is on the painting and just added the paint accordingly without focusing on every single piece of grass. But again, I applied the paint very loosely. While the paper was still wet, I also darkened a few areas with the same green color I used earlier just to build up the painting even more. And then I moved to even darker values of green to create depth. For the mountain, I used this cool blue color in a very light value so it moves to the background, and then I add a little bit of this warm green in the front to mimic a row of trees while the paint was still slightly wet. This way the transition between those two is very soft. For final touch-ups, I used white gouache and added a few white dots here and there to make them look like flowers but also like light reflections. And then I mixed gouache with my blue watercolors to make them opaque. This way I could add a few light blue flowers in between the red flowers. Since I still felt like the field needed more depth, I added another wash of dark green color to the lower part of the painting by gently brushing it over and blending it out. I also glazed over this yellow-orange color to the horizon just to make it look like there are more flowers in the background that are out of focus. As you can see, for the whole painting, I didn't pay attention to all the details, like every single piece of grass or every single flower. I only focused on a few simple shapes and the main colors while creating depth using the reference for guidance. Even though I used a reference picture, the painting still looks different and it has a very airy feel to it, I think. So don't be afraid to experiment, have fun exploring this medium and all the different techniques it has to offer. I really hope this video was helpful. Thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful day and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!